The phone's shrill ring pierced the tranquil morning air, shattering my concentration as I poured my second cup of coffee. I glanced at the caller ID. Hannah, my best friend. Her breath hitched on the other end. Elise, I need to tell you something. It's about Mark. My stomach twisted. Mark, my husband of 20 years. The man I thought I knew better than anyone. What about him? I've been seeing him, Hannah blurted out. For the past year. I'm so sorry, Elise. I never meant for it to happen, but the mug slipped from my hand, crashing to the floor. Coffee splattered across the pristine tiles, a dark stain spreading like the betrayal seeping into my heart. Elise? Are you there? Hannah's voice sounded small, distant. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. How could you? I finally managed to choke out. Mark, my husband? I know it's unforgivable, Hannah sobbed. I just couldn't keep lying to you anymore. The back door creaked open, and I whirled around to see Mark stepping inside, briefcase in hand. He froze, taking in my shell-shocked expression and the mess on the floor. Honey? What's wrong? He asked, concern etched across his face. The face I thought I knew. The face that had been lying to me for a year. I ended the call without another word to Hannah, my eyes locked on Mark's. How long? I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. His brow furrowed. How long what? Don't play dumb, I spat, anger rising to replace the initial shock. How long have you been sleeping with my best friend? Color drained from Mark's face. He set down his briefcase, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Elise, I can explain. Explain? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Explain how you've been betraying me for a year? With Hannah, of all people? Before Mark could respond, the front door burst open. My mother-in-law, Diane, swept in like a hurricane in a floral pantsuit. What's all this commotion? She demanded, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. I turned to her, a humorless smile twisting my lips. Perfect timing, Diane. Your son has quite the story to tell us both. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening. Mark stood frozen, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Diane's eyes darted between us, her lips pursed in a thin line. What nonsense are you spouting, Elise? Diane finally broke the silence, her voice dripping with disdain. Mark would never. It's true, Mother, Mark interrupted, his shoulders sagging. I've been unfaithful. With Hannah. Diane's gasp was almost comical. But why? Surely Elise must have driven you to it. I felt a surge of white-hot anger. Excuse me? Mark stepped forward, his hands outstretched. Elise, please. I felt neglected. You were always so busy with work, and Hannah was there. Don't you dare blame this on me, I hissed, backing away from his reach. You made a choice. You betrayed me. Both of you did. Diane huffed, crossing her arms. Well, if you had been a better wife, Mark wouldn't have strayed. Did you ever think of that? I whirled on her, fury coursing through my veins. Get out. Both of you, get out of my house right now. Elise, be reasonable, Mark pleaded. We can work through this. We've been married for 20 years. 20 years of lies. I shouted, grabbing the nearest object, a framed photo of our wedding day, and hurling it at the wall. It shattered, glass raining down on the hardwood floor. How many other affairs have there been, Mark? How long have you been making a fool of me? Mark flinched, guilt written all over his face. It was just Hannah, I swear. But it's been going on for longer than a year. Almost 2. The admission hit me like a physical blow. 2 years. Half of our daughter's life. I stumbled back, gripping the kitchen counter for support. Oh, for heaven's sake, Diane snapped. Stop being so dramatic, Elise. Men have needs. If you'd paid more attention to my son instead of your career. That's enough. I roared, finding strength in my rage. Mark, pack a bag. You're leaving. Now. And Diane, if you say one more word, I swear I'll. You'll what? Diane challenged, stepping closer. Face it, Elise. You're not blameless in this. A good wife. I didn't let her finish. With a swiftness that surprised even me, I grabbed my still full coffee pot and dumped its contents over Diane's perfectly coiffed head. She shrieked, coffee streaming down her face and staining her expensive blouse. Mark gaped, torn between helping his mother and retreating from my wrath. Get out. I enunciated each word carefully, my voice low and dangerous. Both of you. And don't come back until you're ready to grovel for forgiveness. As they scrambled to leave, Diane sputtering indignantly and Mark casting guilty glances over his shoulder, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The life I thought I knew was in shambles, but for the first time in years, I felt truly awake. I found myself standing in Rachel's cozy living room, my hands shaking as I recounted the events of the past few days. My sister listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. Oh, Elise, she sighed, pulling me into a tight hug. I'm so sorry. What are you going to do? I pulled away, wiping at my eyes. I don't know. I feel so lost, Rachel. How do I even begin to move forward? Rachel squeezed my hand. One step at a time. Have you thought about talking to Dad? You know he went through something similar with Mom before. I nodded, remembering the scandal that had rocked our family years ago. Maybe that's not a bad idea. I could use some of Dad's wisdom right about now. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was Hannah. Again. I showed Rachel the screen, my stomach churning. You should block her, Rachel said firmly. She doesn't deserve your time or energy. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the block button. But what if? No, what ifs, Rachel interrupted. She betrayed you, Elise. Both she and Mark made their choices. Now it's time to make yours. With a deep breath, I blocked Hannah's number. Felt like cutting off a limb, but also strangely liberating. The next day, I found myself in Dad's meticulously tended garden. The familiar scent of roses and fresh soil calmed my frayed nerves as I poured out my heart to him. Dad listened quietly, his weathered hands busy pruning a rosebush. When I finished, he set down his shears and turned to me. Elise, my dear, he began, his voice gentle but firm. What Mark and Hannah did is unforgivable. But you can't let their actions define you. But how do I move on, Dad? I asked, feeling like a lost child. 20 years of marriage, gone in an instant. Dad's eyes twinkled with a mix of sadness and wisdom. It wasn't an instant, sweetheart. It was 2 years of lies and betrayal. But now you have the chance to reclaim your life, to rediscover who Elise is without Mark. His words struck a chord deep within me. I'm not sure I remember who that Elise is anymore. Then it's time to find out, Dad said, patting my hand. You're stronger than you know, just like your mother was. Use this pain as fuel to rebuild yourself, better and stronger than before. As I left Dad's house, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Mark. My heart raced as I read his message. Elise, we need to talk. I'm coming home tonight. There's something you need to know about the affair. I stared at the screen, a mix of dread and curiosity washing over me. What more could there possibly be to say? And was I ready to hear it? I paced the living room, my mind racing as I waited for Mark to arrive. His cryptic message had left me on edge, torn between curiosity and dread. What more could he possibly have to say?
The front door creaked open and Mark stepped in, looking haggard. Elise, thank you for. Just say what you came to say. I interrupted, crossing my arms. He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. It's about Hannah. She's pregnant. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the back of the couch for support, my knuckles turning white. Pregnant. I whispered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Mark nodded, his eyes pleading. I'm so sorry, Elise. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought you should hear it from me before. Before what? I snapped, finding my voice. Before your mother starts planning the baby shower? As if summoned by my words, there was a sharp knock at the door. Diane burst in without waiting for an answer, her face flushed with excitement. Oh, good, you're both here, she chirped, oblivious to the tension. I've been thinking about the nursery. We could convert the guest room. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Diane blinked, taken aback. Excuse me? I said, get out. I shouted, my composure finally shattering. Both of you. How dare you come into my home and talk about this? Mark stepped forward, his hands raised placatingly. Elise, please. We need to discuss this like adults. Think about the baby. The baby? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You mean the child you're having with my former best friend? The living proof of your betrayal. Diane huffed, her lips pursed in disapproval. Now, Elise, don't be dramatic. These things happen. The important thing now is to think about the future. The child will need its father, and… I didn't let her finish. In one swift motion, I grabbed my keys from the side table and stormed towards the door. Elise, wait. Mark called after me. Where are you going? I paused at the threshold, turning to face them one last time. I'm leaving. This house, this marriage, this life. I'm done with all of it. You two can plan your perfect little family without me. As I slammed the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I had no idea where I was going or what I would do next, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer. With shaking hands, I started the car and pulled out of the driveway. As I drove away from the life I once knew, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something new, something entirely my own. I stood in Rachel's kitchen, my hands trembling as I poured myself a glass of wine. The family dinner I had dreaded for weeks was about to begin, and the weight of my secret felt like it was crushing me. Elise, honey, are you okay? Rachel asked, concern etched on her face. I forced a smile. I'm fine. Let's just get this over with. As we gathered around the table, Rachel, Paul, Mark, Diane, and me, the tension was palpable. Diane prattled on about her garden club, while Mark kept shooting me nervous glances. I could barely touch my food, my stomach in knots. Finally, Paul cleared his throat. All right, what's going on? You two haven't said a word to each other all night. This was it. The moment of truth. I took a deep breath and stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I have something to say, I began, my voice surprisingly steady. Mark and Hannah have been having an affair. For 2 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Paul's face darkened with anger. And Diane had the audacity to look annoyed. Oh, for heaven's sake, she huffed. Is that what all this fuss is about? I felt a surge of white-hot rage. Fuss? Your son has been cheating on me for years, and you call it a fuss? Mark stood up, his face pale. Elise, please. We can work through this. I made a mistake, but… A mistake? I laughed bitterly. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. This was a choice, Mark. A choice you made every day for 2 years. Diane waved her hand dismissively. These things happen in marriages. Elise, dear, you're overreacting. Mark is a good provider and… Stop it, Mother, Mark interrupted, surprising us all. This is my fault, not Elise's. I turned to face my husband, really looking at him for the first time in weeks. You're right, it is your fault. And I deserve better than this. I deserve better than you. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. I could see the realization dawning on Mark's face. This wasn't something he could charm or lie his way out of. What are you saying? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I straightened my shoulders, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I'm saying it's over, Mark. I want a divorce. The room erupted into chaos. Diane wailed dramatically. Paul started shouting at Mark, and Rachel rushed to my side. But amidst the turmoil, I felt free. As I walked out of Rachel's house that night, leaving behind the shattered remains of my marriage, I knew I was stepping into uncharted territory. But for the first time in years, I was excited about the future, a future that was entirely my own. I stood in the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the remnants of my life with Mark. Rachel was by my side, helping me pack up his belongings. The air was thick with tension, knowing he'd be here any minute to collect his things. The doorbell rang, and my heart leaped into my throat. This was it, the final confrontation. I opened the door to find not just Mark, but Diane as well. Of course, she'd insert herself into this moment. "Elise, please," Mark began, his eyes pleading. "Can't we talk about this? 20 years of marriage. 20 years of lies." I cut him off, stepping aside to let them in. "There's nothing left to discuss, Mark. Just take your things and go." Diane huffed, her eyes scanning the room critically. "You're being ridiculous, Elise. Every marriage has its problems. You can't throw away a family over one little indiscretion." I felt my blood boil. Little indiscretion? He had an affair with my best friend for 2 years. And now she's pregnant. Rachel gasped behind me. I hadn't told her that part yet. Mark's face paled. "You know about the baby?" "Oh, so it's true." I laughed bitterly. "I wasn't sure if that was just another one of your lies." Diane stepped forward, her voice sickly sweet. "Now, Elise, think about the child. This innocent baby needs its father. You wouldn't want to be responsible for breaking up a family, would you?" Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration with Diane's manipulations came pouring out. "How dare you? You don't get to guilt me, Diane. Not anymore. Mark and Hannah broke up this family, not me." I turned to Mark, my voice steely. "You made your choice. Now you have to live with it. I want you out of this house, and out of my life." Mark's shoulders sagged in defeat. He began gathering his boxes, the weight of his actions finally seeming to sink in. As they prepared to leave, Diane made one last attempt. "Elise, you're making a terrible mistake. You'll regret this. Who's going to want you now? A bitter, middle-aged divorcee?" I felt Rachel tense beside me, ready to defend me, but I held up a hand. I didn't need anyone to fight my battles anymore. "I'd rather be alone than spend another day living a lie," I said, my voice steady. "Now get out of my house." As the door closed behind them, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I turned to Rachel, tears welling in my eyes. "What do I do now?" I whispered, the enormity of the change in my life finally hitting me. Rachel pulled me into a tight hug. "Now you live, Elise. You live for yourself." As I stood in the emptier house, I realized this wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something new, something entirely my own. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. 3 months after Mark moved out, I stood in my newly redecorated living room, admiring the fresh paint and modern furniture. It felt like a physical representation of my new life, clean, uncluttered, and entirely mine. The doorbell rang, jarring me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Hannah, her pregnant belly now unmistakable. "Elise, she began, but I cut her off. "You have no right to be here," I said, my voice cold. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Please, I need to explain. Mark, he left you." I finished for her, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Let me guess, he went running back to Diane." She nodded miserably, and despite everything, I felt a twinge of pity. I knew all too well what it was like to be on the receiving end of Mark's betrayal. Before I could respond, another car pulled up. Mark and Diane stepped out, their faces set in grim determination. "What is this, a reunion?" I muttered, stepping onto the porch. Mark approached, his hands raised placatingly. "Elise, we need to talk. All of us." I crossed my arms, my heart racing. "There's nothing to discuss." Diane pushed forward, her voice syrupy sweet. "Now, Elise, be reasonable. We're all family here. We need to figure out how to move forward for the baby's sake." I felt my anger rising. "Family? You call this a family? The man who betrayed me, The woman who stabbed me in the back, and the mother-in-law from hell? Some family. Hannah sobbed quietly, while Mark looked increasingly desperate. Elise, please. I made a terrible mistake. I want to make things right. I laughed incredulously. Make things right? How, Mark? By leaving your pregnant mistress and crawling back to me? Or by playing happy families with all of us? Diane stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. Now listen here, young lady. You have a responsibility to this family. Mark has realized his mistake, and it's time for you to forgive and move on. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and anger came pouring out. Responsibility? To whom, Diane? To the husband who lied to me for years? To the friend who betrayed me? Or to you, who's been trying to control my life since the day I married your precious son? I turned to Mark and Hannah, my voice shaking with emotion. You too made your choices. Now you have to live with them. And you, I said, facing Diane, you don't get to dictate my life anymore. I'm done with all of you. As I turned to go back inside, Mark grabbed my arm. Elise, wait. I wrenched away from him, tears stinging my eyes. No, Mark. I'm not waiting anymore. I've spent years waiting for you to notice me, for you to choose me, for you to be the man I thought I married. I'm done waiting. This is my life now, and none of you are welcome in it. With that, I walked into my house and shut the door, leaving them all on the porch. As I leaned against the door, my heart pounding, I realized that this was the final test. Could I really cut ties with my past and move forward alone? The thought was terrifying, but as I looked around at my new home, my new life, I knew I had the strength to do it. This was my moment of truth, and I was ready to face it head-on. I stood in my newly renovated living room, surrounded by Rachel and Dad. The fresh paint smell lingered in the air, a testament to the changes I'd made, not just to my home, but to my life. It's beautiful, Elise, Rachel said, squeezing my hand. Just like you. Dad nodded, his eyes misty. Your mother would be so proud of you, sweetheart. I felt a lump in my throat. I wish she was here to see it. She is, Dad said softly. In you. As we settled onto the new couch, I couldn't help but marvel at how far I'd come. 6 months ago, my world had shattered. Now, I was piecing together a new one, stronger and more vibrant than before. The doorbell rang, startling us. I opened it to find Mark standing there, looking haggard and desperate. Elise, please, he began. I've made a terrible mistake. Hannah, the baby, it's all wrong. I want to come home. I felt a moment of déjà vu, remembering the last time he'd stood on this porch, pleading for forgiveness. But this time something was different. I was different. No, Mark, I said, my voice steady and clear. This isn't your home anymore. It's mine. His face crumpled. But our marriage, our life together, ended the moment you chose to betray me, I finished for him. I've moved on, Mark. It's time you did too. As I closed the door on my past, I turned back to my family, the people who had stood by me through it all. Rachel and Dad were watching me with a mixture of pride and concern. Are you okay? Rachel asked. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. You know what? I really am. We spent the rest of the evening planning my upcoming trip to Europe, a dream I'd put off for years. As we talked about art museums in Paris and cafes in Rome, I realized that this was more than just a vacation. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Later, as I said goodbye to Rachel and Dad, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was stronger, wiser, and more confident than she'd ever been. She was a survivor, a phoenix risen from the ashes of betrayal and heartbreak. I smiled at my reflection, feeling a surge of excitement for the future. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led me here, to a place of self-discovery and newfound strength. As I closed the door behind my family, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. This was my new dawn, and I was going to make it shine.